This is Sting! Ric Flair!
Baron Miguel Skick Luna.
If you were a pro wrestling fan in the 80s and 90s, I'm sure you would be familiar with the distinctive announcing voice of my guest this week on A Few Words with Eric Santamaria. He is a ring announcer, writer, and a prolific Facebook poster, Gary Michael Cappetta. I hope you've enjoyed the first couple episodes of A Few Words. The feedback's been good so far. And this time we're going to switch it up. Not someone from the Roundtable this time. We will have more familiar faces from the Wrestling Roundtable in the future, but wanted to branch off beyond that and talk about someone you might be familiar with from his announcing on TV, from his book, maybe some of his appearances at conventions over the years, but we're going to talk about some different things to get to know GMC. We'll talk about how we got hooked up, the stage show based on his book that we produced together, getting involved in Ring of Honor, and other things. And it's funny how we got together, and we're going to talk about that, because growing up a wrestling fan, to find out that someone who you've watched on TV is so close in the same county as you was a big revelation at the time. And we talk about going down to Newport News, Virginia, and Schenectady, New York to do the stage show, which was my first time on the road to do a gig, really. And I remember how when we went down there to Virginia, we were out to eat somewhere, and Gary loves bringing up this story to me, how I really didn't know what to eat at the Boston market or wherever we were going. So I just said, give me chicken fingers or whatever. And he asked me why. This is something that even Rodney busts my chops about. That used to be my go-to when I'd go out to eat, is just give me chicken fingers. Now it's sushi and salmon and steak and other healthier things, but that was my go-to back then. And Gary loves to bring this up, because when he asked me why, I said, I'm out of my element. And he repeats that to me all the time. But I'm in my element now behind the mic, and Gary was too. We ended up going to a lot of indie shows together. We went to Jersey Championship Wrestling, Phoenix Championship Wrestling. He got me into a lot of Ring of Honor shows. I remember we went to see the Lipstick and Dynamite documentary on women's wrestling at a theater when that came out. And we had a lot of adventures, so you'll hear some of that, and I hope you enjoy. So take it away, Lil Bro.
And now we cordially welcome you to the world premiere of Body Slams and Beyond.
Is the only person to work for the AWA, NWA, and WWF all at the same time. It was very brief, but it's true. And he also later worked for Ring of Honor. So I don't think anybody else who's been in the pro wrestling world has that distinction, but he's my old buddy, and I'm here with Gary Michael Cappetta. How have you been, Gary?
Good, Eric. I'm really good. Good to see you again.
Yeah, it's been really good to see you again. We were split for way too long. I think it was about 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
I like to always say you were the person who gave me my break in wrestling. And
that makes me feel good.
Yeah, and even though technically what we were doing back then, which we'll get into later, wasn't quite pro wrestling in and of itself, it was definitely wrestling related. And I didn't know when we first got acquainted that I'd end up making VHS tapes for George the Animal Steel and bumping into all these wrestlers along the way. But that's what happened, and we just got reacquainted. I haven't been to your place for quite some time. This is like, I can't imagine what this driveway is like to clean in the winter. It's so long.
You can't clean it in the winter. It's just, it depends on how much snow you get. But I think the last time we worked together was at the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame up in New York State.
Yeah, technically, yeah. I mean, we did bump into each other in Ring of Honor later on.
Yep.
But you've been on a lot of podcasts lately. That's kind of what put you back in my mind, and I would download a lot of these shows. I saw you on Twitter. It was good to hear my old buddy's voice again.
I hate Twitter. I don't want anyone to go to my Twitter account.
Why?
It's Because why do they constrain you to 140 characters?
That's correct.
That's just ridiculous. People need to come to my Facebook page. That's where I can express myself.
Okay. And you definitely do.
I'm verbose, you know, like I can't, 140 characters just doesn't do it for me.
And you know me, this is called A Few Words with Eric Santamaria because it's a pun, because everyone knows that I'm verbose as well, that we can talk for hours, you and I.
But they're important words, so that's okay.
Yes.
They're interesting words.
Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's the physicist who's very famous. You've probably seen him on TV. He's the head of the Hayden Planetarium in New York. He is a Twitter fiend, and he likes to say that it makes me think some more about compressing my thoughts into 140 characters.
Nice.
So it does use the delete button a little more than I would prefer. And I'm not going to spell you are or anything like that either.
I just have too much to say. It doesn't work for me.
Well, this is a great platform for you then.
And I actually started my Twitter account as a personal account because I had put political things up there,
Right.
Things that I wouldn't do on a wrestling related, like my Facebook page.
Mm-hmm.
But I made the mistake of using my own name. So now it's whenever I post something on Facebook, it automatically goes onto Twitter, and that's really the extent of it.
Well, that's how I saw you doing all these podcasts lately.
Mm-hmm.
You were on Jim Ross's, The Ross Report, Colt Cabana's, The Art of Wrestling, and you introduced me to the Brad Duke Show.
Mm-hmm.
And through that, I saw that he had all these other Big Trouble in Little China actors on and this and that. So that was cool. But I was listening to a lot of your stuff, as I always do. And one thing you told me when we were catching up and talking about doing this show
Yep.
is that you didn't want to say the same stories that you've told many times over the years. You and I have had such a unique experience beyond that
Mm-hmm.
in our little niche of the wrestling world up here in New Jersey that I thought, you know what? I'd love to pick your brain about the old WWF days with Gorilla Monsoon and your interactions with him. Obviously, WCW, you were there at a very interesting time.
Yep.
And everything in between.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to start, as opposed to everyone else covering those sort of areas, with what you did after WCW. Because I remember when we got acquainted, you were telling me about how you had left. This was just when Hulk Hogan was coming in, as I like to call it, Hogan and Friends.
Yep.
And all of his regime was basically taken over. And Dave Penzer took over for you in the announcing spot.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If you want your promotion to take off and I'm working with you, fire me. Because I left WWF and then all of a sudden Hulkamania happened. I left in May of 1995 WCW, and in September Nitro happened. So, you know, if you want to fail, hire me, and then fire me, and then you'll zoom to new heights.
Basically, the theme is like you leave, Hogan comes in and rides the wave.
Yeah. Well, we overlapped in WCW, but it was funny because at the end of my WCW term, they wanted me to come in for one more show past my contract, and we didn't come to terms, so I didn't do it. And then in June of that year, I get a call from the WCW offices from someone who worked in the office and called me in a whisper and said, Gary, I just want you to know something big's going on. They're going to start something big in the fall. And if you want to get included in it, you need to call Eric. And he was referring to Nitro.
Right.
I had no idea what he was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And he probably didn't know either. He just heard something was happening. And I just said to him, well, Eric has my number, so if he wants me to, to work with him, which I probably would have turned him down. But nevertheless, if he wants to, if he wants me to work with him, then he can call me. When you're in a negotiating situation, you don't want to come asking for work.
Mm-hmm.
You're always then immediately at a negative.
You want to be the one who's desired, the one who's wanted for a position.
Right. Because when you're negotiating a deal, that's always a position of strength.
Dave Penzer basically took over for you. And I was thinking, you've said on many shows how when you were announcing back in the day for the WWF that Vince Jr. never acknowledged you. He wouldn't say your name.
Yes.
And you did have some TV time for getting your face on TV with Jimmy Snuka and George the Animal Steel and other heels that would pick on you.
Yep.
And later on, you would be seen in the ring in AWA in Atlantic City, announcing their TV shows, and Stan Hansen's behind you and this and that. And then later on, of course, WCW.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking you would be in the ring. We'd have a nice close-up of you sometimes announcing the next match or the main event or whatever. However, when Nitro started, I don't think we ever saw Dave Penzer in the ring. Do you think that was a similar sort of feeling like Vince Jr., where the announcer doesn't matter?
Yes, because Eric was trying to imitate Vinny. And before I left WCW, at the first TV tapings over which Eric presided, he pulled me to the side and he said, Garrett, he said, what I'd like for you to do is to just speed up your announcements a little bit. Mm-hmm. He never said to me, we're going to try to ignore you, which I would have appreciated. I mean, I could have taken it. That would be okay.
Right.
It's like we're going to put less emphasis on the ring announcer. But he never said that. All he said was, we're going to speed things up. Actually, when I was with the AWA on ESPN, we used to pass off to each other by name, and now down to Doug McLeod, who was the commentator at the time. And let's go up to the ring and Gary Michael Cappetta.
Right.
And Jim Ross was always great with that because it makes you appear, because you are part of the team.
Right.
As opposed to this annoying person who's coming in to announce what we already know. Mm-hmm. Eric did that when I was there my last year. You'll notice the last several months of my WCW syndicated shows, you don't see me either. Mm-hmm. And I'm not mentioned and don't do any interviews and nothing.
That's a shame, because when we first started working together, I remember telling my buddy Lawrence, who's been on the show, he grew up a WCW fan. Mm-hmm. And this was before YouTube. And I was still trying to collect as many VHS tapes as I could. I got really into WCW with the Monday Night War time, with the NWO and Nitro and everything like that. And I did have a whole bunch of older WCW tapes and everything, but I wasn't quite as familiar with you as I would become. And when I told him that I was going to start working with you, or you were coming to the library where I worked, he said, "Oh, this is Sting." And I'm like, oh, yeah. You had a very distinctive announcing voice. So it's a shame that it wasn't featured some more in that respect.
Yeah, a ring announcer has a very short window to be noticed. Mm-hmm. And actually, I'm the best when I'm not noticed. When you're watching an entrance and the voice that's introducing the wrestler that's approaching the ring is making you more tense, more excited, more feeling something.
To emphasize the moment.
Right. And it's not until later, when the fan looks back, to appreciate that voice. Mm-hmm. Then I'm doing my job. Everybody likes to be acknowledged.
Sure.
Here and there. And WCW was great with that. And it just could have been that Eric just didn't like my work. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's possible too.
Now, announcers may be bit players, but what you were just saying really put it in my mind. Bruce Buffer in the UFC. When you start announcing, whether it's Ric Flair or Sting and this and that, yeah, it is a little thing per se that adds to the moment, but it also adds to the familiarity. It adds to those impressionable, warm and fuzzy feelings that developing minds have, and it makes it distinctive.
Yes, because while I've never sold a ticket and I'm an enhancement personality, I do know how entertainment works and how people view things and what they take away. For instance, if you take a look at the late night talk shows, most of them work the same way. The guy comes out, he does his monologue. Now James Corden does things a little bit different, where he has all of his guests out at one time.
Right.
But he's parroting an English style talk show. Now this is really reaching back and getting old, but why, since Johnny Carson and Jack Parr before him, have they never changed that formula? Well, it's because it works. Right. And people are familiar and feel comfortable, like when they turn on their whatever show it might be, Game of Thrones or whatever, and you see the same intro or you hear the same music.
Yes.
Therefore, once I developed a style that was a little bit different for introducing a wrestler, I stuck with it, because then that became my style.
Right. And I mentioned Bruce Buffer because in that sense, he's been with UFC for just about, I think it's 20 years or so. And he's such a institution with his role. you almost can't imagine somebody else announcing the fighters or the fights the way that he does. So
I'm not familiar with his work, so I can't add to that.
I'm just saying that the announcer does have a little bit role, as everybody does. So it's a shame that some of the smaller roles aren't as respected, so to speak.
And if you look at from the genesis and through the 35 years that I did TV wrestling, there's a change, there's a progression. It was very much more like the old traditional boxing style
Right.
when I was with the WWF. And then when I left there and I started doing work with AWA on ESPN, the show just wasn't working, and Vern Gagne was just looking for reasons as to why. And so he thought that I should pep up my introductions.
Yeah, you're the problem.
Right. And so I did, and I didn't like that style, but that's what he wanted me to do. So it was a very broad announcing style. And then when I went with the NWA after that, well, that was a kick-ass, that was a serious, we have feuds to settle here kind of promotion. So I modulated my voice to project that. Like, this is serious, guys. This is the real deal. And it evolved. It evolved.
From leaving WCW on, you had always been a teacher at Christian Brothers Academy.
That's right.
And funny enough, just how close our paths would cross. That was down the street, literally, from Brookdale Community College in Lincroft, where I went to get my associates.
It's across the street. Yep.
Yeah. And you went back to teaching off and on throughout your wrestling career, right?
Yeah, except for when I was with WCW.
And not that I want numbers, but I'm sure you did good money in WCW. I always like to joke that a lot of these WCW guys were making Turner money. Like when they brought over, they being WWF, they brought over a lot of these WCW guys like Big Show and Booker T. They started doing this show Confidential where they would do a Cribs style thing. And it was hilarious to me that all the WCW guys, their houses were insane. And is that what sustained you from there on?
What do you mean sustained me?
Like a good Turner contract?
Well, I had a good deal because there were two parts of, if you worked for the wrestling organization, there were two sides. You were either office personnel or you were performer. And if you were a performer, you got paid really well, but no benefits. And if you were an office personnel, then, you got paid your typical office kind of pay for the Atlanta, Georgia area, but you had stock options and you had full benefits and you had all of your expenses paid for when you had to go out on the road. I had a really good deal because I had office perks and performance pay. So that was really, really nice because I was making a good living and I didn't have any expenses at all.
Good deal.
Good deal. And I also, when I joined them, I knew that I wasn't going to be lasting, just knowing my own personality, that I wouldn't be lasting if I had to travel with the same people in the same car for hours and hours and hours. So I stipulated up front that for me to come on full time, that I traveled alone. So, because they wouldn't pay for your rental car unless there were 3 wrestlers to a car. And so you had to, when you handed in your receipts, you had to say this was for the Midnight Express and Jim Cornette. 3 guys, they would reimburse you. But if it was just one guy, if it was just like Mark Bagwell, he would not get reimbursed. He wouldn't even turn it in. But yet along the way, I would want company. So then I would have people travel with me, when they always would love to do that because my food was paid for, my hotel was paid for, and I shared the benefits with them for those, trips that I traveled with them.
Who were some of the guys that you like to travel with?
Mick Foley was fun. Art Barr, the juicer, Art Barr. I loved traveling with him. It was just by happenstance, The Undertaker, during that, it was one long week in the Midwest, cold and snowy. Dutch Mantel was one night, came along. Yeah. So,
you talked to Mick Foley about his ear?
No, that
or was this before?
That was before.
Okay.
What had happened was we were doing a pay-per-view in the Central Time Zone in the Southeast, and I had to catch an early flight that Sunday morning because I needed to go to a baptism up here in Jersey. So if I had waited and taken a flight to Jersey from the Central Time Zone, I would have lost an hour. So I just decided I was going to drive back to Atlanta through the night, catch an early morning flight once I got back, and then I would be able to make the baptism. And when Mick heard I was doing that, he said, "Can I ride with you?" So I said, "Sure, keep me awake." And he said, "Great." He said, "Because I want to be home for when my kids wake up." That's how those kinds of things usually happened.
I ask about Foley specifically for those who don't know, because when Mick Foley lost his ear in Germany, Gary Cappetta was the one who picked it up and handed it off to be iced.
Yep, it was tossed to me.
But this is after WCW, and you wrote a book, Body Slams, Memoir, or Body Slam?
Body Slams.
Body Slams, Memoirs of a Wrestling Pitchman. Where did you get the idea for the book? Was this something that you had in mind already, or did it come to you after WCW?
No, I had no intention of writing a book. I found it really difficult when I came off the road to adjust to the real world. Remember, that was the first time that I had spent so many consecutive years outside of teaching, outside of doing other kinds of, I had done other kinds of work also, when I wasn't teaching and when I wasn't announcing. And I found it very difficult. So sort of as a transition and kind of to like release whatever I was holding on to, I just started writing down some thoughts and some memories. I never kept a diary while it was happening, but I just started recording what I had experienced. 2 years later, it turned into a book. I sat home. That was my job. I didn't go back to education. I wasn't announcing. I loved it. And it's actually my favorite profession is writing, because you have total control over what you do, when you do it. I just wrote every day. I either wrote or edited every day. It might have been 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, and I might have slept all day. And people would say, "Gary, when are you going to go to work?" And like, well, I am working. I'm not getting paid for it, but it's like an investment. It was an investment of my time. Because after I started, then I decided, well, maybe this could develop into a book. It was just a therapeutic exercise to begin with that turned into Body Slams.
And how did you, it was through ECW Press?
Not in the beginning.
Not in the beginning?
I started writing this before Mick Foley's Have a Nice Day came out. And there were no current era wrestling books out. There were, Luthez had written a book, and there were books from the past that were all less than honest about what went on in the pro wrestling world. This was the first book that was written where the author just spoke frankly about what went on behind the scenes. Mick Foley's was published first, and then mine came out in 2000. Therefore, there was no proven success story of a wrestling-related nonfiction book. I had a couple of agents, but we just couldn't get it to a publisher. So I self-published it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. There's the Black Edition, which is the first edition self-published version of Body Slams. It did so well between 2000 and 2004 or 5 that ECW Press asked if they could pick it up. So then I expanded it. I added to it. The color edition, which you see on Amazon now or in your bookstores, that's from ECW Press.
The book was successful. I know there were some wrestlers and wrestling people who weren't so enthusiastic about it. Was that the minority? What was the reception to it? Was it overwhelmingly positive? Because it was successful.
Yeah, that was the minority, and I don't want to hear from them at all, because when I went to write the ECW version and I expanded it, I gave everyone that I had, and I had very little negative to say about people.
Right.
It's a very positive book. But I had anyone that had any dispute with what I wrote in the original edition an opportunity to respond to me. So if you pick up the ECW version, which is the common version now, you'll see Mick Foley. There was something that I said that he didn't like. Jim Cornette didn't like how I had characterized a story of when he hit a fan in Altoona, Pennsylvania. He had an opportunity and he took it to write. But there were others that just didn't respond to me and didn't take the opportunity. And I just let their words be the final word. The author has a lot of control. So I did not respond to what they were saying. I just let it be, because I just thought that was fair. You can read my account, you could read their account, and you can make your own decision. So that was one of the chapters that was added to the original version. In fact, I can show you. I got a really nice letter from superstar Billy Graham. I'm not even sure how he found me, but he loved the book. So it just depended on who it was.
I just say that because I remember you telling me that even recently, one of the Nasty Boys, was it Sags or Knobs? he had a problem with you about something
Knobs.
in the book.
Yeah. He had a problem with what I said on an interview.
Ah, okay.
When I was on tour to promote the book, I was in Florida. I had done an appearance at South Beach, and following that appearance, I had an interview, live radio interview. Yeah, so he had a problem with something that I had said about what he had done. But it wasn't in the book, it was just shooting the breeze.
Yeah. Well, you talked about making appearances, and that's how we hooked up. You were doing appearances, promoting the book. At the time, I was working at the Monmouth County Library in Manalapan. A friend of mine worked in the film or publicity department. I forget what. I brought to her a flyer for your appearance because I saw it in the lobby, and there were some spelling errors in there. Stuff like Ric Flair was spelled R-I-C-K, and a couple things like that.
Yeah.
I remember she said, "Oh, well, I'll give him a call and put you on the phone with him." And I guess this is like the first time I'd been involved with a celebrity, let's say, or someone that I had seen on TV.
Right.
I believe I was on the phone with you, and you said, "Oh, I'll come in to talk about it." I didn't know that you lived not far away.
Yeah, that's what I remember. I don't remember the phone call, but I remember visiting you in the library.
Yeah, at that point, I had gotten promoted to the periodicals desk.
Yes.
And you came back there where I lent people out newspapers, magazines, and things like that. And we started talking. And you said that you were trying to send around a videotape to shop around your stage show that you had planned out.
Yep.
The problem was that the editor didn't know a thing about wrestling. And you said something like he would show a WCW clip during the AWA years, an AWA clip during the WWF years. And you said something like, I wish I could find an editor who knows wrestling. And
I was talking to him.
Yeah, I felt like a kid in school where I wanted to raise my hand like, "Oh, that's me." That's how we started working together. Do you remember any more details than that?
We worked together for months, and we brought the show on the road, and we were actually ahead of the times. I mean, it was a more elaborate production than what Mick is doing today or JR is doing today.
One-man shows, basically.
Yeah. It was, or Johnny Valiant was actually the first one that I know of to start in comedy clubs.
Right. Even Piper was doing that for a little bit.
But this was what? This was the early 2000s.
2002.
Okay. And it had never been done before, but we did a full theater stage show.
Yeah.
With the giant screen, with your fabulous work being projected and me speaking in front of it, and having a celebrity wrestler was George Steele at the first show that I interviewed on stage. And I had the giant book that was as tall as me that had smoke coming out of it when I started to recite some pretty hot stories, and it lit up, and it was a full-blown stage show.
And how did that come to your mind? How did it go from, I just wrote this book, and now I want to do a stage show with multimedia?
I don't know. It's these. I just create. I don't know. And then I also, during that time, I had written a screenplay.
Yes, Fall for the Dream.
Fall for the Dream. That came out when Body Slams came out. That I can tell you how that came about.
Please.
Was when I was writing the book. One of the easiest parts of writing the book was when I was quoting wrestlers. No, I didn't have any recordings of what they said, so I was paraphrasing what they were saying, but I was writing in their voice. And I thought that was the most fun and the easiest thing to do. And it occurred to me, this is what a screenplay is. It's all dialogue. That's how that came about. I don't know. The stage show, I just thought, well, let me think of a way that I can present it that's never been done before. and it was just a little ahead of its time. Maybe it was a little bit too expensive for promoters to take the chance to bring it in because it had never been proven before.
We ended up doing 2 shows, and the first one was in Newport News, Virginia.
Yep.
This was April, I want to say, of 2002.
Okay.
Like I said, this is still before YouTube, and I had this huge video archive of footage and this and that, and I remember each edit I would do, I'd come up with a version based on your format, where, for instance, you're talking about meeting Stunning Steve Austin, and while you're talking, video starts playing of some old Steve Austin clips. I had stuff from Memphis and whatever, and then moving on into, of course, Stone Cold Steve Austin, as everybody knew him back then. So I would take these edits, copy them off my machine onto a VHS tape, and then bring them to you, and you'd make some notes and changes and things like that.
Yep.
How much easier that would be today with the internet. I could just email them all to you.
Yeah. Plus, I would guess that you were working with what was considered okay for an editing suite at the time, but probably more difficult to work with than maybe the way they're made today. I don't know.
It was digital, so that just means it was computer based, and it was a standalone unit, but I would edit with a computer today, so it'd essentially be the same
You
thing.
were a pleasure to work with because you're very fastidious, and I am too. Like, I like things a certain way.
Right.
And yet you were very easy to say, okay, if you don't like that, let me rework it, and then I'll bring it back, and let's see what you think of this. And then in the theaters, you were right on. I mean, because there were a lot of little cues that you needed to pick up as to when to play certain videos. And I wasn't all that secure with what I was doing as far as remembering the order of what needed to, of how the show ran. And am I correct in saying that all the video was on, I'm going to use the word a loop? You had to play them in order, or could you have pulled them?
Oh, no, it had to be in order. Yeah.
Right. So if I got out of order, that really messed you up.
Oh, it could, but I don't think you ever did. I remember it being really smooth, at least on my end. The most problem I had was when I would cue somebody, because what we would do is in between your clips was a still of your Lil Bro logo.
Right.
And that would pause until we get to the next clip.
Right.
And you knew the format pretty well. It was just a matter of when I say hit the tape, the TD or technical director, the person hitting the button, actually hitting the button. I remember there was one where I was like, hit.
I probably had some cheat sheets. I probably had some cheat sheets up there because I was telling like 20-some stories. So I knew what era I was in, but to know exactly who I was supposed to talk about. And remember, we had no rehearsal.
Right.
But that was cold. What we did, and we drew about 500 people.
In Newport News?
Yeah.
How did that come about? Because I remember Tom Schreiber was the announcer. I forget the promoter's name. It was Chris something.
Yes, Chris.
And George the Animal Steel was your guest that you interviewed. I think was that after intermission, I believe?
Yes, it was the first thing after intermission. It's Christopher Newport University.
Yes.
Chris had come to me. Chris had gotten into bringing wrestling personalities in to do signings. When he came to me, I just said to him, I have something a little more interesting than that. Let me run this by you and see if you're interested. And he was wonderful to work with as well. That was a beautiful theater.
And you said it was too expensive, but and this, again, not just before YouTube, but also before social media, before all this networking between Facebook and Twitter, Instagram, all the other nonsense now. Don't you think that we could have drawn a little more had that been a little more prominent then? Because I thought even just the allure of what you were talking about, the subject matter, but also your footage, because you had some stuff that's never been seen anywhere else. That I thought would have drawn in and of itself.
And I still do. I still have that footage of on the bus, on the tour bus. Well, this is very hard for me to say, but the only reason that it didn't go forward is that I guess I didn't believe in it enough because I wasn't willing to take the risk. I could have financed it. I could have rented theaters and put it out there. I did believe in it, but I wasn't willing to invest in it. And I was looking for someone to invest in it like Chris did.
Right.
And I think that's the difference.
A backer.
Right. The same way that I self-published my book.
Right.
I mean, that cost me a bunch of money up front, which, I more than recouped. Because this was so new, so different, and it was pre-Facebook, like to get the word out, it would have been like promoting an independent wrestling card, back in 2000.
Yeah.
Which is a lot more difficult than it is today, where you have instant contact with fans just by pushing a few buttons.
And that's not to say the internet wasn't around then. Of course it was. There were websites and mailing lists, newsletters, whatever, things like that. But it's not the same. I talk to people all the time now, like a martial arts school where and there's hundreds of students.
Yeah.
But they get most of their business from Facebook.
You would have had to have an advance team to go into the town to promote it.
Mm-hmm.
You would have had to, and this part I could have done easily, do a bunch of media avails, radio interviews, local morning TV shows. That I was successful in garnering on the book tour. We couldn't continue to run the show in the same venue, although years later, if you remember, I had a venue in New York City.
Yes.
Now, because of the population of the New York metropolitan area, I was considering running it weekly. Billy Joel did Madison Square Garden monthly for, I don't know if he still is, but
it could be.
yeah, but the population was different. That just didn't work. I'm trying to remember the name of the venue, and it's not coming to me. The something Light Brigade. What's the name of the improv comedy group up in Chicago where a lot of
Second City.
Right. It's like a Second City group, but they have a venue. They offer it out to
whatever
folks.
comes along. Yeah.
Yeah. It almost worked, but it didn't work. And I had gotten in touch with you because that was, a time after it worked. And I said, are you available? Because it's possible that we can bring this back to life.
Right.
But to go to different cities in different states, it would have been cost prohibitive for me to have flown out and done advance work or to hire someone locally. Then that's a huge risk, as opposed to a promoter who's already stationed there and he promotes wrestling shows and he has his network of getting things out pre-Facebook, a lot of the social network that we have today.
I often wonder when people say, I wish the territories would come back and the era of YouTube and this and that. That's when I think about this era of social media and things like that, because back then you could do the Phantom title switch in Puerto Rico with Ric Flair and Carlos Colon and no one will hear about it outside of the island. Now it would be on YouTube.
And the people have to understand, we're not talking about me showing up and going to a comedy club and talking. We're talking about a full-blown stage production where we needed furniture, we needed stage props, we needed
a screen.
This wasn't just me speaking. It was me speaking with a lot of help, with a lot of props around me. At the time, I think I did have the van. I had a tour van.
I remember it broke down.
I love that tour van. Oh, I love that thing.
I remember waiting by the side of the road. I don't know if you had a flat and you didn't have the proper equipment to change it. I remember waiting for that. I remember driving down to Virginia with you. That was my first road trip for something.
Yeah. So now that we're fleshing it out verbally, I'm going to take back I didn't have enough confidence in the show. Because I wouldn't try to sell a show to a promoter that I didn't have confidence in.
Sure.
It's just that I didn't have the wherewithal to make it happen in different cities.
And both of them were filmed.
Well, definitely the first one was filmed.
I remember a camera crew being there.
Yeah, I don't think the second one was. The second one was an abbreviated version because we didn't have a guest on stage.
Yes.
So I think you had made a separate video presentation you deleted some of the scenes.
Possibly.
Because they wanted a shorter show.
That one was at the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, but back to Virginia, your first time on stage, how did you take to the show itself, actually performing it? How did it feel being up there telling your stories?
I had a good time. It was very different because the theater was darkened and I couldn't see a whole lot of people. And I'm used to performing and interacting with people. It was different. It was the first time and I had no idea how they were going to react, but we got great reactions from them. And remember, we had a meet and greet afterwards
with Virginia Championship Wrestling
Yeah,
wrestlers.
and George Steele was there, and we did a signing that lasted a while. Once in a while, I'll run into someone who was actually there.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. Because I was there too. I wasn't directing this one. I would direct the second one later on. I was just in the audience for this one, and you said some very nice words about my editing.
Would like to acknowledge a couple of people here tonight that all that video that you saw, that editing, masterful job, Eric Santa Maria, who's sitting right over here, is responsible for that. He did a hell of a job.
Back then, you used to call me the magician.
If you didn't direct this, who directed it?
I don't know. I don't know who directed this one. Yeah, that all set up. I was just in the audience with a camcorder.
I don't know why you wouldn't have, because that would have been smart to have you do it. Maybe they didn't allow an outside person to work their machinery.
I don't know.
Because the only other thing I could have done would have been to give them the rundown, and I guess I had to have very definite cues. So when I say these words, you run that video.
On that note, I still have our itinerary. I still have your notes. The videos were fun. I liked making them. I thought those little snippets of 30 seconds to a minute, whatever at a time, that was a lot of fun to do. In fact, I took a lot of pride in that because our first show in Virginia, I want to say it was the weekend after WrestleMania 18. Back then, the big featured match was The Rock and Hulk Hogan, but the Monday after WrestleMania was when Brock Lesnar debuted, and you had a segment in there where you talked about Paul Heyman.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I did have some clips of Paulie Dangerously in there from WCW, but it was mostly ECW.
Right.
But I ended it with a shot of him in the ring with Brock from that previous Monday. So I really wanted to make the show as cutting edge or not as topical as possible.
Yeah. You must have made a version of it so that the guy who I wouldn't even call it directing it, the guy who showed the video, clips stopped,
Yes.
clips, that he could have just followed it all the way through, which means I really needed to have my stories in order.
And you did. A lot of them are funny, especially when you had Big Van Vader, that story where he was singing I Will Always Love You by Whitney Houston on one of the tour buses.
Mm-hmm.
So you see these clips of this big monster just stiffing these guys and suplexing them on their heads, but you're hearing
Yes.
Whitney Houston, and I.
Yes.
But the two that did not work at all, I was so disappointed, was you talked about Vince McMahon.
Mm-hmm.
We had all these clips of Vinny from his Howard Cosell impression in the announcer days with his sports jacket all the way on through the Swagger Corporation.
His powder blue or his yellow blazer.
Yeah, and we would have music play underneath most of this. For Gorilla Monsoon, it was some classy orchestral music. Austin, it was his theme, that sort of stuff like that. But you had no idea what to put for Vince McMahon. And I said, let me put the Imperial theme from Star Wars, which is the Darth Vader theme. Dun, dun, dun. And I thought this would get a huge laugh.
Yeah.
Crickets.
Nothing. Nothing. Well, the part about Vince McMahon did get a reaction at the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame. Not a good one.
Right.
Remember George Steele got up and started yelling at me from his seat?
I was directing this show.
God.
This was in conjunction with the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame. I believe they're moving from Schenectady now.
Yeah, they're in Texas.
Yeah, but this was in the Proctor Theater back in May of 2002. And I'm directing the show. I announced it too, so I'd interrupt you. I'm Gary? Here's this clip of Jimmy Snuka we found to embarrass you.
Once again, unfortunately, we don't have the footage for Jimmy Snuka, but
I'm Gary. Can I interrupt you for a second?
That's Little Bro. Little Bro came with you. How you doing, Little Bro?
I'm doing okay.
There must be an emergency for you to interrupt me here.
Well, we did a lot of research first for this show, and last night something was missing, so I took one more look at the archives, and I did find the Superfly footage.
No, that's impossible, Little Bro.
No, I found it, and I brought it with me. Let's take a look.
And George Steele had been your interview on the Virginia show. There is a rapport, we thought. I only saw the back of his head.
Here's what I don't understand. George was at the first show.
Right.
He was interviewed, and the audio of that show was piped to the dressing room.
Correct.
He was there the whole night. He saw exactly what it was that I was doing. He was on the board of the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame.
Yes.
He was the one that recommended me being there. So here I am doing the show, and I had some negative things to say about Vinny, and that's when he got up from his seat and started yelling at me. Actually, what I was saying was in support of the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, because I changed the show a bit to fit the venue and the event, was saying to Vinny, if you really care about the history of pro wrestling, support this organization, support this group. Don't make believe it doesn't exist. He just got up and started screaming at me. He screamed at me. For the folks that are listening to this, I'm in the middle of a stage show. He's sitting maybe third row with his wife. He just gets up and starts screaming at me. And it was bizarre.
Could I tell you my version of what happened?
Yeah.
This was after the ceremony. I think there was an intermission. There was a ceremony for the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame.
That's right.
Nobody showed up who was alive. Ricky Steamboat, Bruno Sammartino, nobody came.
No one who was being honored.
Right.
Okay.
So it was kind of a lackluster ceremony, really. And then we come on with bing, bang, boom, video and your stories. And I thought we just really kicked ass with it.
Yeah.
But then when you said that he stood up, this was as we were wrapping it up. This was right at the end.
Yes.
And you were saying that it was great to be here. The Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame is a good thing. And Vince McMahon should be here, like you said. Now, I remember George Steele standing up. I couldn't hear him yelling, as you said, but I saw him point to you and blah, blah, blah. And at the time, I remember it was something like he was trying to cut you off.
Yeah, he said to me, that's it. We don't need to hear this.
Okay.
Get off. Well, maybe in fairness to him, I did add that part. That wasn't part of the original stage show, when he was in Virginia with us. But I thought what I was saying was in support of the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame.
And it was.
And yeah, for all I know, maybe they had been negotiating with him. Maybe they had been working behind the scenes.
Well, he was an agent for a long time for them, wasn't he?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They're very close.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I was countering something that they had in the works, and I wasn't aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
What I didn't appreciate, I donated that show. They didn't pay me to present the show. The only thing I asked for was for expenses.
Mm-hmm.
When the show was over, nobody came back to say thank you. Nobody offered to help us tear down. You and I alone tore everything down and packed the van.
Mm-hmm.
And then they didn't pay me my expenses. But I didn't let them get away with it. I badgered them a little bit until they did, weeks and weeks later, just because I thought that's what they committed to and that would be proper.
Carnies in the wrestling tradition, I guess.
So, yeah, it was an adventure.
It was a great adventure for me. That, like I said, I always describe you as the guy who gave me my first break in wrestling. And it was right around this time, too, that you and I had started attending Ring of Honor shows. The first one we went to was July 27th, 2002 at the Murphy Rec, which was later called, I guess, Crowning a Champion, which is when Loki won the first Ring of Honor title in this hour-long four-way.
Okay.
It was very hot in that building. But you and I were sitting in the second row, something like that.
Third row ringside. I only remember going the once.
Because you started working for Ring of Honor, and then I would tag along and just hang out. The announcer stood you up at one point to acknowledge you. You didn't want that?
I wasn't happy about that, no.
You just wanted to be a fan.
Yeah. I went to a wrestling show a couple weeks ago down at the Monster Factory. And they didn't know I was there, and they didn't know I was there until I posted on Facebook about what a good job they're doing with their school and their promotion. Yeah, I just like to go, and usually I sit in the cheap seats. I'm not sure why I was in the third row.
Because it wasn't that big a building.
Yeah, I guess.
Those probably were the cheap seats.
And I think it was Frank Talent, I think. He was a Pennsylvania commissioner.
Yes.
Who I had worked with in the 70s and early 80s when I was with the WWF. He knew me from there. But I just wanted to be left alone.
And what brought you to Ring of Honor in the first place?
I had heard so much. When I was on the road with WCW, I didn't have an opportunity to get out and see what the other products were, what the independent wrestling had become. And I just had heard a lot of good things about Ring of Honor, and I wanted to see it for myself.
And from there on, you were seen as a backstage interviewer and sometimes in the ring interviewer for Ring of Honor. So how did that come about?
Because I was very impressed with the product. And I got in touch with Gabe Sapolsky, and I congratulated him on the product. And I said to him, anything I can do to help your organization, I'll be happy to do it. You don't have to pay me. I want to support your group. The only thing that I won't do is ring announce.
Why? I always wondered that, not to cut you off, but we would go to these shows, and I remember talking to you on the way to the Rexplex and Elizabeth and the Elks Lodge in Queens, and we're seeing these awesome matches like Samoa Joe's the champ at the time, big match with Paul London, CM Punk and Raven, their big feud, and I thought, especially since they're trying to lend credibility to the Ring of Honor title, what better way than having this classy old school announcer announce Samoa Joe in the main event. So why did that never happen?
Your viewpoint is the viewpoint of the promotion. My viewpoint was my viewpoint, which was I had done that for 35 years. And I wanted to expand and experience a different side of the wrestling experience, whether that be promoting or the backstage interviewing that I did or talking with them about booking. Or these are things I'd never had an opportunity to contribute.
Right.
Once I would have started to be a ring announcer for them, that's all I would have been. And that's all I ever was. So I wanted to expand my horizons.
And how did you take to it? How'd you like doing those other things?
Oh, I loved it. I loved it. When I was with WCW for a period of time, I produced their promos for upcoming shows coming to Charlotte, North Carolina, April, whatever.
Sure.
And interview the guys. My favorite one was... It was October, and El Gigante was with the promotion. And I don't remember who he was going to wrestle, but the idea was to get him across as a monster. So I had someone go out and buy a few pumpkins and bring back a plastic sheet, which we stood on. So that when you drop anything on plastic, you hear it. It makes a distinct sound. And I told him I don't want huge pumpkins. I want medium size or smallish. And at the end of after El Gigante finished saying what he was saying, I said to him, and I want you to take this pumpkin and I want you to crush it. And I want the camera to zoom in just on the pumpkin, not on the floor, just on the pumpkin and his huge paws.
Right.
And then let it roll so you can hear the drip, 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 drip. I thought it was ominous. I thought it was cool. Those are the kinds of creative outlets that I never had as a ring announcer. I mean, you announce the name and the weight. Anyone could do it because everybody knows their name, their weight, and what their name is and where they're from. So I used to say to Jim Hurd, as they say in the United Negro College Fund, a mind is a terrible thing to waste. I love what I'm doing, but I'm a little bored. Give me something more to do, which he did, and that didn't work out, but whatever. So, yeah, I wanted to do something creative, a little bit different.
Last time I remember seeing you was at a show in Edison, Ring of Honor. I was doing the hard cam. This was about 2006. And how did it come to be that you left Ring of Honor? You stopped doing those things?
Very simple. I got a call from Gabe. And he said, Gary, this is very difficult for me to do. He said, but I decided to go in a different direction. And I want to change things up a little bit. And I said, not a problem. I said, thank you. I appreciated the experience. Just to put it in context, and you can add names to this. We had CM Punk. We had Bryan Danielson, Daniel Bryant, Colt Cabana. Help me, of guys that rose to...
Austin Aries, Roderick Strong, Jay Lethal.
Who's the guy that's the WWE's just bringing up to their main event from Georgia?
From Georgia?
Yeah. Because with him, I remember we were doing a promo and he started saying some racist, homophobic stuff. And I stopped him and I said, you can't do this. Like, you need to check what you're you know, what you're saying here, you know, you can get the point across, but not be so explicit. Very conservative Christian guy.
AJ Styles?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
And I said, you can't say, I mean, think of another, you know, other phraseology, you know, some of the guys needed help, you know, with their interview skills.
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff like that back then, and really too much that actually got on camera or in front of an audience, I thought, too.
Yeah, and then so Gabe had brought, is it Becky?
Yeah.
I think he brought Becky in to do backstage interviews, and it was just he wanted to change. They were really good to me. I enjoyed working with them. They began carrying my book.
At the merch table, yeah.
At the merch table and online. They were excellent. I don't know why wrestling seems to be one of the only professional endeavors that people assume that once you start with a promotion, you should be there for life. Like, it's not like that. It's entertainment. It's the entertainment business.
Right.
It's not like working as an accountant where you start when you're 21 years old and you retire at 65. It's just not. So people, I think, unnecessarily are all bent out of shape when they're released from a promotion. But you know what? It's your life, and it's up to you to prepare yourself for life after wrestling, and especially for any pro athlete. If you're through when you're in your 40s, you have almost half of your life to provide for yourself. And if you don't have money coming in, because not many people make gazillion dollars a year where, you know, you can be in wrestling for 10 years and live off of it for the rest of your life. It's up to you to prepare yourself for the long haul.
And not even the athletes. I see, and especially when I was at Ring of Honor, so many guys who were in this other company and then in this other company, and it seems like all they know is wrestling as opposed to something else, let's say in the quote real world. And you never had that problem.
You need to prepare yourself for it. To tell you the truth, having a degree, being educated, teaching when I began worked against me with the Mcmahon family because I was independent of them financially.
So they couldn't control you.
Yeah, but that's their problem. Nothing was planned out. When I graduated from college is when I started announcing, when I was 21. But it all just happened. And it doesn't have to be college. It could be a trade. Any way that you can use your talents to support yourself, you need to hone those. Because entertainment business is very fickle. And you never know when it's going to end. And when it ends, you may have some opportunities shortly after you stop appearing on TV, but the longer the period between your last television shot and today, the less desirable you are, whether it be going to signings or whether it be being booked on independent shows. You just become more, and because there's always someone younger, someone always equally as talented or more talented, who, interestingly, have maybe modeled themselves off of you.
Right.
But they're there to take your place. When I was with WCW, there was a guy from Florida, and every month he called Tony Schiavone to tell him that he was a much better ring announcer than Gary Michael Cappetta, and he should bring him in. Every month, there are people that are lined up around the building to take your place. And for you to have any exposure and any success, any opportunity to make it in the entertainment business, you should just consider yourself blessed and enjoy it when it's happening. And don't expect that it's going to last for a lifetime. And I always tell people to think of, when you were a kid, think of some of your favorite TV shows that are long gone.
Right.
And think of all of the actors that were really hot at the time when you watched those shows. And tell me where they are now and what they're doing for a living. And who knows? But they have to continue their life. They have to support themselves. And it just always seems to me that in wrestling, there's always, not always, but too often, there's a bitterness of the talent who's told, we don't need you anymore. We're moving on. They need to keep their product fresh. It's understandable. So when Gabe called me and told me I'm moving in a different direction, you know, I just wished him well. And if I can help you in any way in the future, you have my number.
Well, I didn't see you at Ring of Honor shows after that, but you had mentioned a little while ago that you still go to indie shows, wrestling shows. You don't watch TV wrestling, do you?
Once in a while, but rarely.
Is that WWE or maybe Lucha Underground or something like that?
Lucha Underground is a very interesting, dark kind of program, which I haven't seen this season, but I did watch a couple of episodes last year. I don't think I have it on my loop and my cable anymore. For instance, I watched parts of Raw leading up to WrestleMania and right after WrestleMania. But it just depends. I'm not up on what's going on today.
But you do enjoy going to shows.
Oh, I love that the most because it's not a matter of watching the wrestling. It's a matter of being in the atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what I liked.
And I was very surprised to see recently that you were doing some ring announcing down south. I think mainly Jeff Jarrett and Matt Hardy and some other NWA sort of things. How'd that come about? Because you were so adamant about not doing it in Ring of Honor, and now
no. What I wouldn't do is be their full-time ring announcer. I think maybe twice Gabe had asked me, he said, would you do me a favor and introduce this match? Boy, I don't know how it happened. I'd done Colt Cabana's podcast. I guess it just was listened to a promoter who didn't know that I was probably still alive and could still speak or what. I don't know what he would have thought, and got in touch with me, asked me if I would be interested in announcing his event. And I said, yeah, just guest announce. I'll just do the main event. So he brought me in. I did it. The video hit. I don't know if it went viral, but from there, my Facebook page, just every day I had hundreds of friend requests.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of odd. So I didn't do much to make that happen. So then people started calling me and asking me if I would come out and guest ring announce. And then after that, I did NWA Mid-South. I flew down to Memphis. The group Book Pro Wrestlers is booking me out for guest ring announcing if people want it.
And you've been doing appearances at conventions for a while, though, haven't you?
Yeah. Actually, they started back in the early 2000s or late, like leading up to 2000, up in North Jersey and in New York. There was a guy named John Arezzi. I think he was probably the forerunner of fan conventions. And they've become more common now.
Right.
I've been doing those, but that was really it. I don't have any need to go out and do any of this. But every once in a while, it's fun.
And you got some more coming up as we're winding down. Let us know where we can see you next.
July 23rd, Wilmington, North Carolina, a big fan fest. Masters of Ring Entertainment is the name of the group. If you go to my Facebook page and look at the upcoming events, you'll see where I'm going to be.
And where can we find you on Facebook? Type in Gary Michael Cappetta.
That's it. Yep.
And on Twitter, which you hate?
No, we're not going to Twitter. Stay away from Twitter.
All right. Well, look up Gary Michael Cappetta. It was great talking to you and hope to have you on again.
Thanks a lot, E. I appreciate it.
Okay, let's take it home, little bro.
Gary may not like Twitter, but I do. Give the podcast a follow at A Few Words with ES. Also find us on Facebook. Look us up on SoundCloud and iTunes. Give us a subscription. Give us a good review. It'd be much appreciated. Speaking of which, I want to give a special thank you to Abel Herrera, longtime Wrestling Roundtable fan. Gave us our first review and a very good one, and I hope you do too. Thanks a lot. If you want to send feedback, the email is afwpod@gmail.com. Gary's book, Body Slams, is available on Amazon. I'll be posting the link to that if you want to check it out. You can find him on Facebook. Type in Gary Michael Cappetta. And if you want to meet Gary in person, ask him some questions, see if he can tell you some stories. He's very generous with his time, as he was today, and he will be back. And I'm sure he'd love to meet you in person. If you're in Wilmington, North Carolina, he will be signing at the Masters of Ring Entertainment's Pro Wrestling Fan Expo 3. That's July 23rd at the Coastline Conference and Events Center. You can find out more at mastersofringentertainment.com and get tickets at ticketfly.com as well. Next week, I will have a few words with pro kickboxer, the mechanic Brandon Coutinho. In the meantime, look us up on social media, and you are listening to the song Ritual by Lawrence Haber from the album Anxiety Log, available on iTunes, Spotify, CD Baby, Amazon, and Google Play. I wonder if Jim Johnston did these cymbals. Listen for that bass solo at the end. He's all about that bass, and so am I. See you next week.
Turn on all the switches, make sure all the doors are on light. Give up all your passwords, take your eyes away from the light. Back up without looking, roll the windows down in the rain. Break a fake connection, force yourself to feel all the pain.
We ready with the music? I'll give you the cue if whenever I know. Just let me know.